Welcome to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz. This episode we're going to be talking about a broad range of topics relating to Missouri energy, including health, environment, economy, and politics. But before we get into the discussion, let's take a look at this announcement. Welcome to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz. This episode we're going to be talking about Missouri energy issues as relates to environment, health, economics, and politics. And with me I have Mollie Freebairn. Mollie, it's great to have you on the show.
Hi, Don.
Now, you are an energy and environmental scientist. Do I have that correct?
Yes, I am now.
Okay, and so you have studied these issues for quite a long time.
Yes, I really want to thank you for inviting me to come talk about some of all the work that I've been doing for the last 18 years at Missouri Department of Natural Resources. I've been looking at energy issues in general and power plant emissions in particular.
Now, is Missouri about on par? Is Missouri doing a really good job of reducing these power plant emissions and reducing and responding to environmental crises?
Missouri is more of a leader in not doing anything about greenhouse gas emissions and toxic emissions. We are a leader in burning coal for energy. We're one of the...
So Missouri burns more coal than is typical in most states?
Yes, we are.
And greenhouse gas emissions also?
Yes, we have some of the highest per capita greenhouse gas emissions in the United States and the world.
And you have some slides, don't you, that we could take a look at that illustrate this issue?
Yes, and yeah.
Okay, and what's the first one going to cover?
Well, we're going to start out looking at the aging power infrastructure that we have in Missouri, and looking at how coal burning in all of these power plants has dramatically increased over the last 50 years, and just some of the staggering quantity and complexity and toxicity of the emissions coming out of the power plants. Not only the greenhouse gases, but heavy metals, including mercury, sulfur and nitrogen oxides, acid rain, particulates, and countless toxic organic compounds as well.
Now, what is a toxic organic compound? Is that the same thing as mercury, or is that something different?
Mercury is a heavy metal on the periodic table. It's a separate element.
That would be an element, okay.
Correct.
And what is a toxic organic compound?
Those would be all the carbon-based, carbon, hydrogen-based types of compounds, not only, burning coal, because that's carbon, a very complex carbon mixture. So
okay,
that breaks down. When that burns, it releases all kinds of organic compounds.
And these, it releases organic compounds in addition to the heavy metals and the other chemicals that would be on the periodic chart. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. And so what can you tell us about some of these, the level of toxicity?
But when we go through and we'll start with mercury, and then, which is just one element, just one class of compounds on the periodic table, and then we'll look at coal ash waste, which contains dozens and dozens of other toxic chemicals as well, both organic and heavy metals.
Okay, so mercury is the first slide that you have. The next slide you have, I mean?
The next slide that we have is just looking at Missouri's aging power infrastructure. These are the 20 major coal burning power plants and the one nuclear power plant in Callaway, which is the newest power plant in Missouri. Was built in 1985, so it's just like 26 years old. And then all the 20 major coal burning power plants in the state are older than that. The largest power plant in the state at Labadie was built in 1970, so it's 40 years old.
Okay, so that's Labadie. Now, where is Labadie?
Labadie is just about 30 miles west of St. Louis.
Okay, so it's so a lot of those emissions are going to blow over in the St. Louis direction, won't they?
Yes, and there's a total of 4 coal-burning power plants that encircle the St. Louis area, in the St. Louis metro area. In addition to Labadie, which is just west of here in Franklin County, there's the Sioux Power Plant in St. Charles County, the Merrimack Power Plant in South St. Louis County, and Rush Island in Jefferson County.
So we have a lot. Everywhere where somebody lives in the St. Louis area, they're not that far away from a power plant which is burning material and putting a lot of toxic elements into the air.
Yes, and I'd like to show you on the next slide that actually of the top 6 polluters in the state, 4 of them are in the St. Louis area, and those are the same 4 coal-burning power plants that I just
so it's
described to you.
not just the St. Louis has 4, but the St. Louis has 4 of the largest that emit some of the greatest amount of toxins.
Yes, and this is of all the industries and all the sources of pollution in the entire state. We have 4 of the top 6 in St. Louis.
Okay. And that slide shows the different colors show the various types of pollutants that are emitted by the power plants.
Right, 4 of the major ones. The greenhouse gases actually had to be divided by a factor of 200 to fit on with the sulfur and nitrogen oxides, which are 2 of the largest quantities of chemicals that are emitted from burning coal.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay.
And this next slide just shows how the quantity of coal that we burn in Missouri has drastically increased from 1960 to the present. The amount of coal has increased 10 times, and with that, of course, all of the greenhouse gas emissions, mercury, and
You say that the amount of coal burned has increased tenfold since when?
since 1960.
That's incredible. That's only half a century. It's increased tenfold. Now, there's been all this talk of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and controlling all of the emissions from plants, and that's been especially intense since the year 2000. But you're saying that the emissions have not decreased since the year 2000?
No, they have increased considerably. They've increased 50% since 1990, and about 25%.
And so it looks like from this chart that it doesn't make very much difference who's in office, that the emissions, the toxic emissions flowing into the state just increase year after year.
Well, there has not been any decisive move in Missouri to reduce greenhouse gas emissions on the part of the state government. There have been a number of environmental organizations and individuals who have done a lot that we can talk about later to reduce greenhouse gases.
Okay, great.
And hopefully we can get enough information out to help support their work.
Okay, and you show that the electric power coal combustion has increased, and what are we looking at here?
This is the World Resources Institute's report on greenhouse gas emissions in the Midwest. I represented Missouri on the Midwest Greenhouse Gas Registry about 4 years ago to account for greenhouse gas emissions throughout the Midwestern states. And that was what they found most striking about greenhouse gas emissions in Missouri, is how coal burning has dramatically increased even since 1990.
Well, yeah, that is amazing, because that's when the talk about greenhouse gas emissions really picked up, was after 1990, and for 2 decades there was a lot of talk, but apparently very little being done.
Right. Well, the Greenhouse Gas Council in Durban, South Africa, again was trying to get the United States, among other developing countries, to commit to greenhouse gas reductions.
Right. Okay. Oh, okay.
And this is the World Resource Institute's summary of greenhouse gas emissions in Missouri and electric generation. That's primarily the coal burning. There's also a little natural gas burning, but that's 45% of all the greenhouse gas emissions in Missouri, followed by transportation.
So the number one, did you say the number one is residential?
The number one is the electric generation.
Okay, electric generation is number
45%.
Okay.
And transportation is 26%, industrial 7%, residential is 5%. That's like burning natural gas for heat. 3% commercial, 9% agriculture, 4% industrial processes, and 2% waste.
Okay, so the 45%, which is electric generation, that actually goes throughout every part of the economy. In other words, that ends up being for home electricity, for business electricity, for heating, for church, for any sort of electric generation, for churches, for schools, for everything. Okay, yeah. So if we cut down, if there were a way to cut down the use of electricity, that sounds like we would get the biggest effect right there.
We sure would.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what we're going to look at, because coal is so very, very dirty. It comes out of the ground. It has a very high carbon content, but also a very high mineral content. And when it burns, it's very dirty, and so we have to burn a lot of it to get enough energy. In Missouri, we're up to now, we're burning 45 million tons of coal every year. If you do the math, that works out to many homes are burning between 20 and 60 pounds of coal per day.
That's an incredible amount. Okay, we're going to need to take a break, and after this break, we're going to come back and finish up talking about the whole energy issues in Missouri. Welcome back to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz. This episode we're talking about Missouri energy issues, and with me I have Mollie Freebairn, who is a environmental and energy scientist. Mollie, you've certainly given me a lot of information that I had sort of thought about, but hadn't really known in such depth as you have. Now let me ask you something. You can tell me if it's true or not. You're talking about the large amount of coal that's burned in Missouri. Now, I've heard that the coal that was the least dirty was what people got out first and burned that up, and now that coal that was avoided is going to be more and more the coal of the future. Do you know if that's true or not?
That's true for crude oil. For coal is a little different. Of course, that it has the same ancient prehistoric origins as crude oil. It's just not as far along in the process. But yeah, coal is very highly variable, but it does not rise to the top or come out in any particular order. But the composition of it does vary quite a bit. But it contains many more impurities, and it burns even much, much dirtier than petroleum does. And I think a lot of people...
So that's why there's so many people objecting to the burning of coal, because it releases so many different toxins that contaminate the water, contaminate the soil, and poison people directly. Exactly.
It's just the worst fossil fuel of all. We all know that it contains really the highest levels of greenhouse gases, but it also contains sulfur and releases sulfur and nitrogen oxides and sulfuric acid and nitric acid rain and other horrible acid gases, hydrochloric acid and hydrofluoric acid in huge quantities that just would dissolve your flesh. Particulates that cause all kinds of health and breathing problems, countless other organic compounds, and heavy metals again, and mercury.
Okay, and tell us just about how much coal is burned in Missouri.
45 million tons is burned in Missouri. So that is
the annual rate, and the annual rate is going up. So that's 45 million tons about 2010 or 2011, and we expect to be a little bit more in 2012 and 2013.
Yes, they're predicting that will grow by about 20% in the next 20 years.
Oh, wow.
That's what Ameren is predicting.
Okay.
And this is showing, a comparison between burning coal and natural gas. Both are fossil fuels, but coal has twice as much carbon dioxide emissions per unit energy, or per trillion BTUs, I think is what's in this chart here. It has infinitely more heavy metals because there's no heavy metals, no mercury released when you burn natural gas. Organics, there are organics in natural gas. It's an organic fossil fuel, so it does release some organics, but half as many as coal. And the sulfur and the nitrogen oxides, it releases 4 times as much as natural gas and 1 million times more sulfur oxides.
Well, 1 million more times. That's an incredible amount.
Right, and mercury, all the mercury is released by coal only. Natural gas, neither natural gas
does not have mercury.
Correct.
Okay, now what I've heard about comparisons of natural gas and coal is that this natural gas has been relatively clean in the past because people would look at just the process of burning and not the process of obtaining it. And if we're looking at a fuel, we need to look at the whole life cycle of the fuel. What happens during the process of extracting it, transporting it, or moving it in pipes? What happens during the process of burning it or using it, which is a lot of times the only thing which is looked at? And then what happens to it when it's left over, when you're done with it? And so what I've heard is that nuclear power might be clean when it's used, but the waste issue, it lasts for billions of years. But natural gas might be clean when it's burned, but the process of actually extracting it from the ground, is that called fracking?
Hydraulic fracturing or fracking.
Yes, and that's supposed to be using a whole lot of toxic materials in order to get it out of the ground.
Right, yeah. What happened when they found all these new sources of natural gas in the United States, they went and got the hydraulic fracturing exempted from the Clean Water Act and started blasting, down underground with these incredibly complex toxic mixtures of fluids. They really ruined, the potential for natural gas to be a really clean burning fossil fuel and source of power in transition from burning coal to developing renewable energy.
Okay, so what we're talking about, the process of using itself, the slide is correct, that there's much, just vastly less, sometimes 1 million times less toxicity. But if we look at the process of extracting it, then natural gas is not necessarily so clean.
Well, yes, the way they have done it, which is very irresponsible and devastating to the environment. They didn't need to do it that way. That's why we have that's why we have the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, but they circumvented
with the exemption.
Okay. Yes.
Okay.
If you look at power plants such as the one shown here, which is Labadie, Missouri's largest power plant.
That is a shot of Labadie. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, and the different types of toxic chemicals come out. The stack is where the greenhouse gases, of course, come out. And most of the mercury and nitrogen and sulfur oxides, acid rain, acid gases, fine particulates, and other miscellaneous noxious gases, carbon monoxide, cyanide, ammonia, things like that. And then what stays behind, for the most part, in coal ash waste are the heavier particulates and heavier metal compounds, of which there's very many. I'll show you a table in a few minutes, but arsenic, barium, chromium, nickel, strontium, uranium.
And uranium is included there. So we have, so the ash from a coal burning plant has material which is radioactive.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes, there's some scientists at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory who claim that the true value of coal is as a source of uranium and possibly other rare earth elements.
Well, let me ask you, when people talk about burning things, they often talk as if when you burn something, it just goes away and disappears. Now, after you burn coal, you're left with coal ash. Now, does the coal ash just disappear, or does it go someplace?
It most certainly does not disappear. Well, it is stored. I'm not sure if we're quite to the pictures of right by the power plant. You will see there's an area where they store the coal ash waste. We'll talk about the coal ash waste after we talk about the mercury.
Okay.
But,
okay. Well, let's get into the mercury. How does that affect other organisms, other wildlife?
Right. Well, after the mercury is emitted from the stack, and most of it is in the form of elemental mercury and also reactive mercury gases, it settles down. Well, parts of it travel all the way around the world and build up, accumulate in fish. Well, it settles on the land, it settles on the water. Which settles on the land, the rain will wash it into the water, and the smaller fish and microorganisms will start eating the mercury, and the bigger fish will eat them, and it will accumulate. The mercury does not leave these organisms, but
that's what's meant by bioaccumulation. Okay.
Yeah, and then the birds and other predatory animals will eat the fish, and humans as well will eat the fish, and their bodies.
Okay, and that's why a lot of times there's warnings not to eat fish from certain lakes because they might have had a high concentration of mercury.
A lot of times there are, and a lot of times if you are unable to locate the correct website on your computer, you will miss the warnings, because there's high levels of mercury found in fish in practically every water body.
Okay, we only have about a minute left, or maybe a little more, so let's take a look at the next slide, and I think that's what we're going to be able to focus on. Okay, and what does this tell us?
This is one of the studies that have been done on mercury health effects from mercury, not from fish, but directly in the air surrounding power plants and other types of coal burning industries, finding that there is an elevated rate of childhood autism, and that is highest closest to the plant. They found elevated rates of about 3.6% for every 1,000 pounds of mercury emitted.
So the more mercury,
the
the more children are going to be born with autism or develop that. Okay, we just have a few seconds left. What do you think would be the most important point that you would want viewers to leave the show with?
Well, I think for starters, just an awareness of all of the dangerous emissions from burning coal.
It's really toxic. Mollie Freebairn, we're having to wrap up. I want to thank you very much for tuning in, for joining us this episode of Green Time. I want to thank everybody for tuning in.